Hi, I'm Stuart Allen, Senior Producer at Derby Theatre, and as part of our DT at Home series, we are bringing together the assembled artists, producers and theatre makers to discuss LGBTQ work and some of the challenges, some of the joys. So yeah, I'm going to pass you over to Leo to introduce themselves first.
Hey, my name is Leo. I'm a writer and director, and I run Milk Presents, and we're an associate company at Derby Theatre.
And then I'll go to Rommi.
My name's Rommi Smith. I'm a poet, playwright, performer, theatre maker and a scholar. And my research subject is theatre and performance.
Thanks, Rommi. Will.
Hi, I'm Will. I'm a theatre maker and comedian, and I performed at Derby Theatre at Departure Lounge last year.
Jo.
Hello, I'm JoTyabji. I'm a theatre director. I'm associate at Milk Presents, so I'm the associates company's associate. And I also make performance and I drag as Joie de Vivre.
Cairo.
Hey, I'm Cairo. I'm an actor and also a facilitator of Milk Presents.
Thank you. And last but no means least, Ben.
Hello, my name's Ben, and I'm the creative producer of In Good Company, which is the flagship professional creative and business development programme for theatre makers in the Midlands. Thanks,
Ben. So our conversation, we've got around 30 minutes. I've got a series of questions which I'm going to pose to all you. I'll direct the questions first and foremost, maybe at two of you, but then we can have a bit of an open discussion. And excuse me if I keep looking down at the phone and bits of paper. So the first question really is, why is it important to make performance that centres around queer narratives and identities? So I'm going to pass that first to Theo, if that's okay.
Yeah. I guess I think it's because we exist, and so when you spend your time maybe, I guess from a trans perspective, people think you either don't exist or they are fighting for you not to exist. Then part of having this work out there is being like, we're here, we exist in the world, so we absolutely need to be existing in theatre, in art, in performance. So seeing those stories is just part of it's part of our culture and our communities. So we absolutely should be seeing queer narratives staged.
Rommi, I wonder if you've got anything to add to that.
I think my provocation back to that would be, why not? And for us to sit with why not? Because I think quite often we can get into what might appear to be or feel like a justification dynamic of where we are asked to make the case for. And I think that that's important, that we don't get trapped by that idea of making the case for. It just is. I was thinking about this earlier on today and thinking that one of the central things that theatre and performance does, if I borrow a phrase from Carol Ann Duffy, the former poet laureate, she said that poetry's function was to celebrate the music of being human. And I would say that one of theatre's central functions is to celebrate the music of being human, and we are human. So we celebrate our stories, and a love story between two men or two women or featuring a trans character is still a love story. Yeah. So those core central themes, which are central to storytelling and theatre, are also central to our lives. And that's part of what we celebrate in creating and making the work.
Thanks, Rommi. Has anyone else got anything to add? Any other kind of thoughts on anything that Leo or Rommi's just said? Jo?
Yeah, maybe I would just want to extend it from identities and narratives to perspectives. I like to think, in fact, we at Milk Presents like to think of queer as an activity. It's a verb. It's not just a static thing that you are or you aren't. It's a way of understanding identity as shifting and multiple. We are none of us just one thing. So why would we, as Rommi is saying, why would we leave out one part of what forms our perspectives, or indeed something that really is kind of part of the material fabric of how we understand the world and how we arrive at how we look at stories.
Thanks, Jo. Cairo, did you want to add?
Yeah, So I think it is, it's really important that you have a variety of voices. It's for multiple reasons, not just, you know, to tick a diversity box, but because like everyone's been saying, like there's a different perspective, even just raising awareness by being visible as well. Like, you know, my friend Dr. Ronks has a quote, "You cannot be what you do not see." If you can't see someone on stage, you don't hear people's stories, then I think that's a loss. And like Rommi was saying, it's why not, you know?
Thanks, Cairo. Thank you. Any last thoughts before we move on to our next question? Any last?
Well, yeah, I'd love to add that I think there's a myth of neutrality often that pervades culture. So it's neutral when we're talking about white stories, it's neutral when we're talking about heterosexual stories, etc. But we need to, as part of not that we need to, we know, but I think in terms of a wider systemic understanding of the ways in which homophobia and heteropatriarchy performs itself, we need to understand how it's ingrained within structures, and that what we have come to see or accept as neutral, as universal, is deeply biased, is deeply subjective, and it's a repetition of those stories being told and told again. I think if there's any function of the work that queer work does, and queer narratives do, and queer scholarship does, it's to recenter, and it's to place center what has been marginalized. It's moving it from, to quote that phrase, the margins to the mainstream.
Thanks, Rommi. And I think I'm going to move these questions around because you've left us in a really interesting place. So I'm going to come back to my second question. But I suppose that the third point is, what do you think is lacking in and needed in queer performance right now, which seems an interesting sort of follow on from where you were, Rommi, with your point there. So Ben, I wonder if you've got any initial thoughts on that question.
Yeah, I think what I miss most personally is joy. Like, I think that I want to see joyful stories and a whole array of stories being told that feature queer narratives, not just any one aspect of them. It feels like there is understandably a lot of sort of trauma that comes, is explored, but I think joy is a really powerful emotion, and I think joy is empowering as well. So I'd love to see more joyful stories, and maybe more work for younger audiences as well, because that, you know, you don't. I think we see more of that actually recently, but we're not seeing as much of it, and I think it's key that a lot of the trauma that is presented on stage does come from childhood. So if we can present more joyful stories and work for young audiences, which feature or centre queer narratives, I think that, you know, that's only a great thing.
Thanks, Ben. And I wonder, Leo, Joe, maybe anything about that, just thinking where we were as Derby Theatre and Milk Presents embarking on some R&D around making a piece for younger audiences. I just wonder if there's anything from that's arisen from the R&D you've been carrying out, or your conversations, to kind of echo anything or that Ben's just said.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm thinking, Leo, about how we were, you know, so we've had an online R&D and it was joyful, and we can't wait to make the show. And one of the things that was coming up in that R&D was, so we know that there's queerness in this story, and in fact we're pretty sure that our central character is, you know, queer. I don't know that we've had many conversations about in what way, but you know, it's just there, we know that. But one of the things, you know, this is a story about Marty going to a party. So is it a queer narrative? I mean, it's just a queer kid going to a party. instead we were, well, not instead, maybe as well, that we sort of shifted to a conversation about going, how do we just construct a world in which queerness is? Kind of harking back to what Rommi was saying, it's there, it's always been there. Maybe we've used different words to describe ourselves. It's, you know, our lives and our relationships have taken different forms, but we are age old as humanity. So let's just start portraying worlds, particularly exciting, fun worlds for kids, where that's just matter of fact, that's just taken for granted.
Yeah, totally. And I think when, in terms of what's missing with queer performance, or what you could do more, like sometimes when you think of queer performance, or on, like, I don't know, an advert or a Pride advert or whatever, it's like queer is white, queer is able-bodied, queer is cis, queer is male, like LGBTQ, like, do you know what I mean? And I think we want queerness to like permeate all identities and performances. And so yeah, with Marty and the Party, we're thinking of queerness in the form, queerness in the casting, rather than queerness in a queer narrative, and kind of, and having that for kids as well. So the show is called Marty and the Party, and it's for under fives and their adults, and it's about having a massive party. It's totally celebratory and queer and for kids at the same time. So but yeah, I would just, I would like kind of run out of what I was going to say, but I've merged those two things. It's like...
Great, absolutely. Will, did you have a point just to pick up on?
Yeah, kind of jumping off what Jo said earlier, I think it's focusing more on queer perspectives. I think something I always really long for, when what we see in terms of the mainstream of what we get in the queer stories, they only seem to tend to focus on identity, and they don't really push further from that. I think there is a space for identity, and we need more space for that as well. But I think we need more narratives and more fun stories. Exactly, I can't wait to see Marty's Party. But just building and going on these fantastic adventures which are through the queer perspective. If that makes any sense.
It'll be coming to a theatre near you in the near future. So you can come, Will, there you go. Jo, have you got your hand back up?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, in terms of something that I would really love for us as queer makers, and therefore from queer performance, I feel like there's been probably a necessary zeitgeist in the last traumatic 4 years of people making work that speaks really vividly and strongly from personal experience. But I would really love to release us from that, and to say we don't need to authenticate our work by saying, this is something I have lived. That, you know, there's a strong place in, of course, for confessional work. But I mean, let's just circling back around to that perspective thing again, isn't it? It's that thing of, yes, and even if it wasn't your direct personal experience as an artist, everything that you're creating, and the perspectives and the issues and experiences and complexity of this world that you're surfacing is still valid. And I think sometimes we can get really specifically tied, and it can be around race and class as well, to going, well, are you telling us the truth? Serve up yourself for us, you know? And I kind of want to go, hang on, we're making art, we're making performance, we're telling stories, complex, detailed stories that also tell the truth about the world. It doesn't need to be my coming out story.
But then there's like, there's the other thing of, if that's for us as like queer makers, but then also it's not like a free-for-all that anyone can just take those stories and make them into whatever show they want without any authenticity or care. Just want to chuck that in as well. But yeah, totally. It's like, and also I think I feel like I had to make the coming out story. I feel like every story I write I have to be like, no, it's not a coming out story.
Is there a reason you feel that, Leo? Like, we joke, but is there a reason you go, actually, I feel I've got to do that?
I think sometimes as an artist you write about what you're in. So like Jo is super, I didn't know, but Jo, the other show Milk Presents have, is like super trans, but I just had no idea when I wrote it, and it's only when I look back now I'm like, oh, it's so obvious. So I think that when you're in something, you're an artist, you use what's around you, But I also welcome what Jo was saying about, like, you know what, you can write about other queer narratives and you don't have to like put yourself on the line so much. Sorry, Rommi, were you?
Or can I just make a really direct like contribution to that? Like, I took a show to Departure Lounge last year that was really very much about British and Indian fascism right now and the way that they interconnect. But there was a real hunger from the venues that we toured it to, not from Derby, I hasten to add, but for some venues they're like, oh, this is a show about what it means to be queer in this. And I'm like, no, not at all. No, it's, I mean, or maybe in a certain way, but no, it's about these very specific political things, and I'm a queer person making it. But it's not about my identity, although my identity affects and informs the work that I'm making. So I feel a resistance to go, okay, the only reason this story or this piece of work is valid is if it's my authentic story, rather than an authentic truth crafted and worked as an artist about the world that we're living in. Sorry to cut you off, Rommi.
No, thank you. Rommi, did you have a point to add in?
I think back to your question, which was what's lacking. And I sort of want to throw in a provocation to the question, really, as with the first one, because the lack isn't in the work. And it's not a lack in the artists. The lack for me is in the structures and the systems and the resources. So for me, if you ask me the question, what's lacking, it's the platforms. You know, Pride Month is all very well. It's great that it exists, and I am honouring and acknowledging of the fact that Pride Month exists as the result of activists making that so. But we exist for 11 more months of the year. And my concern is that what can so often happen with a tick box, lip service culture is that you only exist and you are only important if it's this particular month, day or week. And it's disingenuous. It's not about changing the landscape or fabric of things. It's about ticking an agenda box and then you become marginalized again. I'm interested in the structures changing, boards changing, directorships changing, scholarships changing, the very fabric of things changing so that those different voices are heard at different stages and spaces, regardless of whether, I have to say, the narrative is an overtly queer one or not. It's about presence and dialogue, and it's about long-termism. It's as opposed to short-termism, which I think blights so much equality work, is being given pennies to produce miracles. And when you don't produce those miracles, the failing, the deficit is the individual artist or the organization, not the system that only gives them a small amount of money or time to carry out that work. So for me, the lack is in sometimes vision. And when I say that, I don't mean that that's the vision of queer artists. I mean, it's the wider funding streams that are available. I think the lack can often be about time and space and profiling. The spotlight belongs to these stories 11 more months of the year than just this month.
Thanks, Rommi. That's a great provocation back to us. Any thoughts, Will, Cairo? Anything to add to anything that's been said? Go. There you go.
Yes, there we go. I haven't got anything extra to add, but I think you just articulate that's just absolutely spot on. I think a lot of times it is down to resources. It's about allowing people the space, allowing people to have that platform, because there's there's so much talent out there, and it isn't like we do not just exist for 1 month of the year, and sometimes it can feel a bit like that.
Thanks,
Completely
Cairo.
agree, and sorry for disappearing. My laptop
You disappeared
melted,
and
so
then you came back.
I'm on my phone. My laptop melted. It's so hot. So it's quite fun camera operating. I know I'm not the only one here who's probably experienced times when talking to a booker or a programmer at a venue that doesn't want to book my work unless it's part of June or a separate Pride festival. We aren't just for Christmas. We do exist all year round, as Rommi said, and I think it's what kind of has been celebrated in the past about queer work is that it represents fringes of society, but put those in the mainstream, put those on your main stages and put them for longer runs and longer venues. And I appreciate this is stuff that is pre-COVID and pre-pandemic, but it's stuff to bear thinking about going forward.
Thanks, Will. I'm completely jumbling my questions around because you're kind of getting to really good points when I go, oh yeah, that sort of leads on. And then I suppose so then what naturally leads in is going, so what can the industry change in order to better support queer work? And I suppose in a way Rommi's provocated some of that, but I just wonder if other people have got thoughts. Particularly, I'm going to go to you first, Leo, just to if you've got any initial thoughts to that, and maybe some of the things that Rommi's already touched upon.
Yeah, I mean, I think actually, we run a lot of training, and I think it's all well and good coming into a venue and running a training workshop, but it's as Rommi said, it needs to happen in the boardrooms, it needs to happen in who is running the venues and the organisations. There's only so much we can do, and it's actually after a while quite draining to constantly be like, please, like, would you do us a favour if you just like, if you have a trans character, would you just cast someone trans? And like, you wouldn't believe the like pushback of simple requests. And in the training I spend a lot of my time being like, okay, how about this? And I'm so nice, and I'm literally like, maybe you shouldn't have come to me first, because I'm now just like, you know, there's only so much you can be like, enough, stop. And I think now we're going to be like rebuilding the industry potentially. Like we can also, in Joe's words, burn some down. I don't know if you want to come in on that, Joe. But yeah, some of it, you know what, maybe we don't need to take with us when we rebuild. Like, I think there's lots that venues can do to support queer people, and actually it comes down to essentially, before we even begin our work, am I safe in your venue? Am I going to feel welcomed in your venue? Are you going to see me in your venue? And before you can answer yes to all of those things, like only then can I make any work in your venue. And then if I can make this work, the audiences that come in, am I bringing my audiences to you? Or if I'm a director, I brought this cast together, am I going to be able to send them to on a tour, like to X, Y, and Z venues? Like, are they going to be okay? And sometimes the answer is no, and hasn't been. And so I think, I mean, I can go through the practical things of what that might look like, but I think there's a lot of rebuilding that we can do, and it needs to be a priority of like, well, safety first of all, and then like feeling good, and then making work.
Thanks, Leo. Cairo, have you got anything to add? Any thoughts?
Just like coming off from what Leo said, I went on tour, and yeah, there were some places that it was a bit hostile, and I don't know, like I'm so used to sort of being in London where things are better, and the more kind of up and down the country you go, you realise that actually some people, you know, they might be fighting to put the toilet signs back on, or they're just not really, they're misgendering people. And it's little things like that, you know, as queer artists, we shouldn't have to deal with that side of things. Like that making it more accessible in the first place will allow your artists to feel comfortable to then be able to give their best creativity, to then, you know, do what they do best. And I think that's something that often gets overlooked, and it really, that little time, some things are really simple changes, but people overlook those details. And I think that would be the first step as well, or one of the steps you can do.
I don't think London's perfect though. I think sometimes,
no.
you know, there's, you know, I put regional like this, but you know, venues from all over the country can be super welcoming, and London can not be. But yeah, I hear what you're saying, Cairo.
Thank you. I think that it leads into that point of what things do you need to consider. So when you're working with queer and trans artists, to make sure they can work safely and fully. I think it leads into that question, not, you know, to go back to some of the things you were saying, Leo, you know, some of those things that can be put in place. So I wonder, Will, if you've got thoughts on that as someone who's toured and been into venues that may or may not be challenging.
Yeah, I've done a bit of touring in both studio theatres and also the rural touring circuit, which I love, and I'm really I'm really, really proud to have been able to tour my work through it. It does come through with its challenges, though. I think I'm still relatively starting out, so I don't necessarily have all the answers or all the right questions at the moment, but things that have helped me, I tour my show with a queer stage manager. We're able to check in before and after the show on how we've both found the process. When I've worked as a director working with other queer and trans artists, again, it's just checking in during at the beginning and end of rehearsals each day, and also on the tour, and just reminding them that you have each other there. Pronouns, toilet situations. I'm sure everyone else has much more to add to this as well, but those are main things. I think in terms of tricky situations is when, and it's something I've learned the hard way, but to avoid the tricky situations is being in contact from the venue from the beginning and having lots of good contact, which you need anyway, regardless in terms of marketing and all that sort of stuff. But even when you're like trying to work with them to get queer and trans audiences in to their venues, it's the one I know I'm working with a good promoter or good venue organizer when as soon as they're booked, we're having this conversation and we keep on in regular contact building up to it. I know I'm a bit in danger when they go a bit silent on me. I don't know, what's everyone else's experience of this?
Should we go to Jo? Have you got any initial thoughts?
I mean, I guess, yeah, it's sort of hard to separate this out from where theatre is now. And of course, theatre is in a really radically different place now. I would say that, I've had phenomenal experiences with venues who are very welcoming and have gone out of their way to reach audiences who might particularly enjoy my work. And they'll still, I don't know, get stuff a bit wrong at the intersections of race and queerness. And you go, and yeah, having someone there to check in with is really important. But I think knowing that a venue is working hard for you is what you need. And I guess what I'm flagging is that yeah, I feel like small scale touring has been in a really pressured state for quite a long time, actually. We've had a decade of arts cuts, and when I feel well supported by a venue, it's because they're supporting me really well as an artist. And I've had some surprising experiences with venues who I associate with queerness and queer artists and queer audiences who actually have not been there at all. And maybe I slightly put that down to, yeah, stretched, scraped, thin industries, if I'm being really generous to the people involved. And now here we are facing this crazy existential crisis. And there will be a temptation to retreat from the margins and to not centre the margins and to kind of go to where the big bucks is and where where you feel most confident that you've got a strong audience base. And I would urge that that's not necessary, because our communities are already integrated in our families and in our friendship circles. And if we're doing that dividing out, then we are doing an injustice to our communities and our societies that goes way deeper than whether we're getting an audience into our shows. All of which is to say, wait, I've really lost myself. Yeah, no, this is what I really wanted to say. Obviously theatre's in crisis, but the trans community is having the rug pulled out from under their feet in many ways right now. And so what do we need from the industry, that my colleagues and loved ones and, that I exist and make work in? We need allies. We need people to step up and say, this isn't okay. And okay, also buildings are under threat, and we need our public and our audiences and everyone to step up and save theatre, but we can't save theatre and not save all of us, save each other in this moment of real, reckoning as a society.
And of course, to add on from that theatre is in a situation of precarity, but I think what has been a salvation for many people throughout this time of great uncertainty and turbulence has been theatre. has been all the content that you see online, the notion of being able to access digital spaces via which people feel a sense of collectivity, feel a sense of meaning and purpose, and organising the shape of a week that has felt at certain times, I think for many people, formless around the fact that this production is going out at this time, or this is being released by this theatre at this time. So we also need to hold on to that human thing again, of it's necessary and it's vital to keeping us intellectually and emotionally and spiritually alive in this time and in the afterwards. Of course, because theatre is, back to the points that we were saying earlier, it's about story, and story is about how we make sense and keep sense of our lives. I think what feels central for me is the question, and I ask myself this all the time, around inequality and theatre, whatever that inequality is who gets to tell the story? Who gets to tell the story, and who keeps getting to tell the story, and who has the keys to the kingdom of story placed in their hands repeatedly again and again and again, and why? And how do we, not just we who are in this space, because I'm so very conscious that this conversation that we're having can only exist for the time frame that we're in, but that we, in terms of time, are in conversations that have happened before us, in conversation with dialogues that will happen after us, and there are other people having these conversations. So we don't have to find all the answers within the 40 minutes that we have. And I think that can often feel like these moments are placed under duress. You know, we've got to find the answers within 40 minutes, otherwise they can't exist and the world ends. Actually, what's vital is to hold on to this fact of story, and that it is necessary and it will always be necessary. And how do we facilitate processes and play our part in engaging with other change makers to make that a more equal territory, so that it isn't the same voices speaking the story, it is many voices.
Thanks, Rommi. I wonder from that, if we think of the audience, so I think it'd be really interesting to hear from you all, because you know, we've talked about placing work in front of those audiences, but how audiences receive the work you make or receive the work you're in. I'd be really interested to unpick a little bit some of the kind of conversations you've had, or some of the moments you've had with those audience members, be that on stage or maybe after, when talking about your work. And particularly, Ben, I know you talk to lots of artists, so if there's anything key that's come out from kind of conversations around audiences. So I wonder, Leo, I'll start with you again, just because you're in the centre of my screen.
I guess it makes me think of a time when we very first showed Joan in Derby, and we did the show and it ran over by, I think, like 25 minutes. It was long and amazing, but it was long. And then actually everyone left, and in the car park outside in Derby car park, we had this whole conversation with Lucy Parkinson, who plays Joan, and like people who were in the audience, all about gender and unpicking gender, and that not really about the show at all, like a bit, and obviously there's a lot of drag in the show, but actually that was a really important part of it, that the show kind of plants the seed to grow any of a number of conversations, and that one just happened to happen in the car park, which was great. And I think, you know, mainly I want people to come and have a great night out. Like, that's the main thing. I want them to have a really good night out with us, and then if they think of some other stuff as well in a car park or anywhere else, you know, that's what we're looking for.
I would absolutely echo that from when we did Joan 2 years ago in Symphony Community Centre. Some really interesting conversations by taking the work to, you know, a community centre who came for a really good night out and everyone really enjoyed it, but then people lingered after to have some really interesting conversations with the cast, with Derby Theatre, but also amongst themselves. You could hear families discussing it, and some people brought young children, so some really interesting conversations with those young children. So I think actually that's a real good example of where the work becomes a starting point for a deeper conversation. Cairo, I wonder if you've got any experience of maybe conversations you've had, or
sorry, make sure I press the right buttons. Yes, so I do remember doing the UK tour of Bullish. There was many conversations just with different audience members. I think something I just remembered, because I've never experienced this, you know, being in a show, is that one of the audience members got a tattoo of bullish because it resonated with his story so much. And he kept coming back, you know, next time, first time I think he was with his girlfriend, the second time he brought his mum, and like even his mum came up and hugged the whole cast. And we just had so many good conversations because they needed to hear this story. They needed to hear the story of Bullish and of the Minotaur. And, you know, it just, it's something that it really did. I feel like it made a difference in their life. And usually it's like, it's just so easy, like skipped over, like we don't always get the chance to share those stories. And I know, like, even growing up, I never saw any narrative of trans people. I didn't even see a transgender man until I was like 24. And then a year later, I came out as trans. So it is really important to have that visibility, to hear these different stories, because sometimes you're searching for the answers to understand yourself. And it, you know, it's telling stories is a good way to access that information as well.
We're sort of drawing this conversation to a close, and I think audience is really good. And as Rommi said, you know, it's a conversation to bring us all together, and we can't change everything in 40 minutes or so. But Rommi, I'm going to ask that question to you about audiences, because I feel like throughout this conversation you've flipped the questions on its head, and then we'll leave with a moment where we all go, we need to go out into the streets and say Rommi said. So I feel like maybe this is the moment.
I think about what do we mean by audience and where, because is it, you know, I think about my own work as a poet, playwright, theatre maker, performer, and also someone who gives lectures, performative lectures. And, you know, routinely I give performance-based scholarly lectures in collaboration with jazz musicians, improvising jazz musicians. So I'm working all the time with performance. So is a performance space a lecture theatre? Is it an art gallery? I mean, I did 2 projects in 2018 in the Whitworth Art Gallery, with a project that was a co-collaboration by Manchester Literature Festival and the Whitworth Art Gallery. And that was a promenade piece that was in response to an exhibition of 500 years of wallpaper. And I toured the audience around the space, and again was working collaboratively with a musician. But is it a BBC radio programme where you know, I might read a poem or perform something, or is it a printed book? So audiences for me are very different things. I may not be there physically. You know, if it's a printed book or a printed poem, or just being commissioned by Bradford Literature Festival and Speaking Volumes to write a new poem I've decided to write in celebration of Little Richard. He passed, as many people will know, in May, and I wanted to honour some of his flipside narrative, and that includes, well, not so flipside, but his queer narrative. He was very present and out for his time, and was preempting many things that come after him, and I think, again, is not quite acknowledged for that. So my audiences might be people who experience my work where I am present, as in through the work, the printed text, or an audio recording or a sound recording, but they might be audiences that I'm present with in a particular space. And I'm interested in my own practice in terms of challenging where that space is and how I relate to audience. I think one of the things that I discovered with the promenade work for me, and I did research going to see other promenade performances beforehand, was just the intimacy, the greater intimacy that I feel when I'm doing promenade work. And that sense of the audience are absolutely 100. We already know that they're part of the performance, but they even more so become part of the performance. I remember around in the Whitworth Art Gallery, Manchester Literature Festival commission, there was a piece of wallpaper that was a repeat pattern of a lynching. It was an artist's wallpaper, and I had performed a piece that was about Emmett Till. And I remember it was an elderly white woman who was just in front of me, and we were all together in a crowd around this wallpaper, and I uttered a particular word in the poem, and there was a pause, and this old white woman said, "Yes." And it was just that kind of moment of connection of someone, and those intimacies that happen, and that reciprocity that happens in spaces that if you replayed that performance again, it wouldn't necessarily happen in that way. So yeah, audience for me is about a relationship, it's about a dynamic, and it's about intimacy, and it's about connection. And the audience absolutely performs a role within the performance.
Thank you, Rommi. That's it. We're going to have to leave it there, but I feel like we could carry on talking for a lot longer. Really just want to say thank you to you all. I think it's been really great to chat to you all, some great food for thought and some ways we can go forward and think about things. I'm only sorry that we can't carry on talking, and our 40 minutes has happened, and we've changed the world a little bit in 40 minutes, maybe just a tiny bit in our minds and our stories. So thank you all. It's been great to chat to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you.